Hi and welcome. This is Michigan's AutoTalk podcast, episode 47. I'm Phil Tower, giving Al and John this episode off. Every episode of Michigan's AutoTalk podcast is about celebrating the automobile, everything automotive. And you know what? We're also about helping you and supporting you, the car and truck owners across our great state of Michigan, birthplace of everything, well, almost everything automotive. You can catch our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, of course, iHeartRadio, and we are on your Alexa smart speaker as well. It's my pleasure to welcome back a radio friend and one of the best in the business. He covers the automotive industry in Detroit for WWJ Newsradio 950, and he's also a guy who gets to drive some of the coolest cars ever. Jeff Gilbert, welcome back to the program.
Yeah, not a bad gig. I enjoy it.
Not a bad gig at all. By the way, if you're not following Jeff on Twitter, Jeff tweets all kinds of cool things, and I responded to one of your tweets today about the baseball strike. We're not going to go off on that. What is your Twitter handle so I can give you a plug on that?
Yeah, it's at Jeffrey Gilbert, and Jeffrey has to be spelled odd. It's Jefffery, but that makes me one of a kind. So
yeah,
at Jeffrey Gilbert.
That's the right way to spell it. So, Jeff Gilbert, I want to ask you, give us a debrief on the 2022 Chicago Auto Show. This is a huge show, Jeff, and I know there were a lot of interesting things that came out of it, a lot of anticipated vehicles, including the Ford Bronco Everglades. They debuted that at the Chicago Auto Show, a new Chevy Sequoia, a lot of interesting things. It's a really big show compared to the old Detroit show. How would you compare the Chicago show and just your impressions about that, first of all?
Yeah, first, everything has been shuffled, thrown up in the air because of the pandemic. Chicago actually had the best timing of all because they had the last show before everything shut down in 2020. They were able to squeeze a show in the summer of last year, just a brief show, and then they were able to have almost an entire show. Now, anybody who has gone to the Chicago Auto Show will know how big it is. This show was not as big as normal. They normally fill two halls of McCormick Place. They had it all in one, but those halls are so giant that it's still bigger than anything in Detroit. I mean, Detroit tends to be a big media show. Chicago tends to be a big consumer show. So there weren't as many products as you would normally see, but it was an auto show. People could get out, and because they didn't have a lot of space, they added more test tracks. I believe they had 6 different tracks, from a Camp Jeep to an opportunity to ride an F150 Lightning, and they actually did accelerate a bit. I got to do that, and for a brief 100-foot ride, you could feel the immediate acceleration of that vehicle. So was it like the Chicago Auto Shows of old? No. But is it nice to actually be back with people at a show? Yes, definitely.
Yeah. I want to stop you at test tracks. So this is actually an opportunity for people who pay to go to the auto show to actually sit in the car and move a few feet and drive the vehicle? Is that right?
They don't get to drive, but they get to ride with a professional driver. It actually started about a decade ago at the Chicago Auto Show, where Jeep built a big course. They called Camp Jeep. Now they've added on to that year after year. Now Ford has a course, Toyota has a course. The Stellantis brands actually have a couple because they had their Dodge vehicles in a course. So they have actually learned that people like those experiences. We saw that at what Detroit was trying to do for an auto show last summer. They called Motorbella. It was an outdoor thing. There were a lot of opportunities to ride in vehicles, even test drive a few vehicles. And when Detroit goes to downtown Detroit in September, the thought is there's going to be a lot outside and a lot of opportunities to take a ride in a vehicle. They haven't laid out their plans for this show, but when they were going to do a show in the summer of 2020, one that was canceled, They were actually going to do some experiences on the roof of Cobo Center. Oops, I'm sorry, it's now Huntington Place. But anybody who has ever been there knows that there's a lot of parking up on that roof. So they were going to take away the parking lot and use it as a demonstration area. We don't know if they're going to do that yet for the September show. Personally, I hope they don't, because it's a great parking area, but it also would be a great place to give people rides in vehicles.
So, Jeff Gilbert, as you walked around the show in Chicago, this was, by the way, I think it was around President's Day. It wrapped up a couple of weeks ago. Does that sound right?
It started second Friday of, well, the press days were Thursday and Friday, but second weekend of February was when it started, so it probably ran through President's Day. When you're a media person and you talk about an auto show, you're talking about the press preview days, which is where they show off new vehicles, where executives are around for interviews, things of that nature. So it's kind of a different thing from the consumer show. I was gone before it opened to the public.
Yes, but you do get a sneak peek, and it was interesting for our listeners. If you didn't listen carefully to what Jeff said earlier, he indicated very much like the Michigan International Auto Show, a much smaller show that happens here in Grand Rapids in DeVos Place, where AutoTalk originates here in Grand Rapids. That show was markedly smaller, probably about maybe 40 or 50% of the cars that are normally there, but they still had a good showing of vehicles. And again, Jeff, I would attribute the smaller number of vehicles at the Chicago Automotive Show to the chip supply issue and other just supply chain issues and just the high demand for vehicles. Fair enough to assess it that way?
Yeah, fair enough to assess it that way, but obviously you're talking about one of each vehicle, so we're not talking about huge numbers. But the show organizers did tell me that they didn't get as many vehicles as they normally would have. And you also just have the evolution of auto shows. Some car makers are not embracing them like they used to. And in certain cases, a show like a Chicago show, I understand, there were certain car makers, I don't know which ones, that decided not to support this show. So the local dealers actually pitched in and had an exhibit because obviously it helps them. The days, if you ever went to the Detroit show in the era maybe from 2005 to 2016 or 17, it was kind of like the Super Bowl of auto shows, and everybody was trying to outdo everybody else with the best exhibits. And they actually got to the point where they were spending so much money that they were almost like, stop me before I spend more. So they actually, that's one of the reasons for moving the auto show is they had less move-in time, so it was kind of like nobody could do the really elaborate exhibits anymore because they didn't have 3 months to build them like they used to. There was just some craziness in Cobo Center for a while. I remember one time Mercedes went totally crazy and put an ice rink in the middle of the convention hall, and then they had to put down salt on the ice so you could walk on it. And the video boards are amazing. You're still going to see those. You see those in Chicago, but multiple story displays, things of that nature. Those are apparently gone for good now.
We're speaking with Jeff Gilbert. He covers everything automotive for CBS Newsradio and also WWJ News Radio 950 in Detroit. He was at the Chicago Automotive Show, which happened just a couple of weeks ago, as we kind of debrief on that. A lot of electric vehicles, specifically trucks, becoming a very crowded category, Jeff Gilbert. And I know we had the announcement of the Ram Revolution, as they call it, the 1500 EV pickup truck. We now have not only a Ram EV, Chevy announced their Silverado EV. I want to talk a little bit about that. We already knew about the Hummer EV. The F150 Lightning is old news. And then, dare we forget, the Rivian R1T, the new, totally new name brand in trucks. And
Yeah,
boy,
and the one thing about the Ram Revolution, they haven't shown that truck yet. They're a little behind everybody else, so to get some buzz for it, they're going to Ram fans and asking them what they want in a pickup truck. So that's part of the game is, Ford goes first, then GM a year later. Of course, GM has to say, we're later, but we're better. And then Ram is, well, we're even later, but we're asking you what you want. So it's going to be built based on your needs. So, there's a little bit of marketing buzz there as well.
yeah, we are certainly being inundated with EVs, and that's a perfect transition, Jeff Gilbert. I wanted to talk about the push right now. Two big developments. The first one for Ford to splitting their company now, essentially splitting into two separate operations, one for internal combustion engines, one for electric vehicles. Was that expected? Was that a surprise? And how does that, if at all, change the company?
Well, first expected, well, there have been reports for a couple of weeks that something was up, and Jim Farley, who is the CEO of Ford, has been saying we can't continue doing what we had been doing. There were rumors that they might even spin off one of those businesses. They say they're not going to do that. We're talking about two separate, distinct businesses, but both within the Ford Motor Company. And what you're really seeing here is you're seeing Ford and Jim Farley take a look at companies like Tesla, like Rivian, that are EV startups and saying, hey, can we build an EV startup within our company? Keep it within the company, but do the same kinds of things those companies do. They brought in an executive named Doug Field who had worked for Tesla. He was briefly in charge of Apple's self-driving car program, so he's a tech industry veteran. He, along with Farley, will lead this Ford Model E part of the business. And again, they're going to be a little more tech oriented, a little younger in terms of the teams that develop the vehicles, but they also have all of this established talent for the regular vehicles. I mean, the F-150 still makes the bulk of their product. Explorers, when they can make them in Chicago, are still big sellers. Same thing with the Mustang, same thing with the Escape. These are the core of the company. So a lot of people are saying, hey, is this going to demoralize the workforce that's still on the internal combustion side? Well, not yet, because they're the people who are still making the products that are selling in big numbers. You're going to have another whole group of people, and there might be a number of new hires here who are developing the electric vehicles. So there's obviously a little bit of show for Wall Street as well, because Wall Street loves EV startups, and Farley loves to woo Wall Street. Now we can say, look, we've got an EV startup of our own. So there's a little bit of that at work as well. But it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because we've spent the last decade at car companies breaking down silos, which is what they say, getting people to work together. Now Ford is actually building two silos. They say there's going to be cross work where the EV area will learn about, mass production from the internal combustion area. The internal combustion area gets tech from the EV, but you can almost see two little fiefdoms appearing there. So, there's a lot to watch. This could be a wonderful success, reinvention of the auto industry. It could be something else.
Yeah. Jeff Gilbert, I want to ask you something directly related to that, with the explosion of, and that's not a good way of putting it, with the focus, not a good word for a lot of electric vehicles, with the focus on so much in terms of EVs by the big three. I want to ask you, has there been any talk from the industry in terms of the massive amount of training and retraining needed for all these automotive technicians? I was pondering that the other day, thinking this is a wholesale change of an industry, a repair industry that's pretty much operated under the same model for decades, Jeff Gilbert. So I don't know if you've heard anything about that. I'm curious, and maybe this is another episode where we can dive deeper into this.
Yeah, it's funny you should mention that, because I was on a panel for the Michigan Association of Broadcasters today with a guy who heads the State Auto Dealers Association, and I asked him about this question. So your timing couldn't have been better. And essentially, car dealers are working on that. There is, of course, the thought that EVs won't need as much maintenance, but it's going to be a different kind of maintenance. And this is one of the really cool anecdotes that he told me is that, dealers have been installing charging stations, things of that nature, new technology, but the technology is changing so fast. There have been some cases when they get one thing installed, it's obsolete, and they have to replace it with something else. This has been a back and forth between the dealers and the car companies for a while. Cadillac in particular, GM more or less told them that they had to make some pretty big investments in their stores if they want to go along with Cadillac's all-EV future, and they gave dealers who weren't interested in doing that the ability to opt out. Some did, but others had to make pretty big investments.
Yeah, and I think this is going to be something that at the same time that it's a major shift and a major change, I would also look at it as a tremendous opportunity for the trade schools and the young men and women who are interested in working on these vehicles. Certainly a new opportunity when we're seeing so much of a push, Jeff, towards the trades and maybe less emphasis on college education. Lord knows anybody of our veteran ilk in broadcasting, college was like a what? Who needs that? And I think you're seeing a real strong push right now on trades, automotive technicians, welders, journeyman electricians. I mean, just so many things there. And I think this electric vehicle sector is just ripe for that kind of a focus.
Well, there's a lot of opportunity in that area to begin with. I mean, dealerships are just hurting for trained mechanics to begin with, and especially somebody who has a certification in electrification. Now realize this is not happening overnight. There's going to be a lot of new EVs this year, but it's going to take a while for things to phase in. I mean, we're talking about decades before internal combustion engines are no more. I mean, I doubt either one of us will be around when the last internal combustion engine is taken off the road.
Yeah. I would think that's a pretty safe bet indeed. Well, it's always good to catch up with you, Jeff Gilbert. I envy you being able to be amongst all the people in cars at the Chicago Automotive Show, but that's good to know that at least there were people there and a lot of good things, a lot of new things to come out of it. Where can people read the stuff and hear your stuff that you produce for CBS News Radio and WWJ?
Well, obviously, wwjnewsradio.com is our website, and there is the Odyssey, AUDACY app where you can give a listen to things. So thanks. And, of course, the good old-fashioned amplitude-modulated radio at 9:50 a.m.
Yes, when you are in the greater Detroit area, that is the station that goes on my radio, 9:50 a.m., and they do some really good stuff there. And who knows, you may even hear one of Jeff's reports, if not on a CBS News Radio broadcast, wherever you are. Until next time, Jeff, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
He is the reporter for everything automotive for CBS News Radio, also for WWJ News Radio 950 in Detroit, as we just said. For Al Schwinkendorf and John Puick, the real stars of the show, I'm producer Phil Tower. That puts a wraps on episode 47. Thank you for listening. We'll be back with a brand new episode before you know it.